Hello, Gremlins! This project is a bit different to anything I've done before. A few months ago, a friend mentioned a website where you can print custom playing cards and game pieces, and instantly I decided I wanted to make a custom deck of foresty aesthetic cards with my own suits, illustrated face cards, everything. And I decided to record the process and make the deck of cards available for anyone who wants to buy one through the website I printed them with. The link is in the description. I've been working on these cards since April in bits and pieces. Before I sped up my recorded footage, it was 11 hours long, and that doesn't include all the sketches I did off camera or all the formatting. This is maybe the longest I've spent on a project on this channel, definitely the longest I've spent on a digital project, and I hope you enjoy the results. My first step was deciding what suits to create to replace the classic diamond, heart, spade, and club. I brainstormed a few ideas before deciding on mushrooms, bones, frogs, and crows. I also created a limited color palette so that all the cards would look unified, and added a border of vines around the card that will appear on every card I make. My next step was formatting the symbols to create the non-face cards, and to do that, I found an image of all the traditional cards in Google Images and lined up all my suits with the suits on those cards. I didn't record this process as it didn't seem particularly interesting. However, after creating all the non-face cards, I sent examples over to that friend who inspired this idea in the first place, who henceforth shall be known as the Ravencat Gremlin, and she suggested having the symbols vary a little. For instance, having 3 slightly different shaped mushrooms rather than every mushroom be identical. At the time, I felt that this was worth a shot but probably wouldn't work, but looking back it was a really good choice. I started by drawing 2 more variations of the toadstool and reformatting all the mushroom cards to have that variety. Next, I created 2 more flying positions for the crows and did the same process, reformatting all the crow cards. For the crows, I used a reference image of actual flying crows to make the sketches, although I don't show that part of the process on camera. Next up was the suit of frogs. These are all small green frogs with a slight speckled pattern. The original frog appears to be crawling up a wall, limbs slightly askew. One variation I created has all the limbs tucked up to its body, the other has the limbs spread further, as though it is climbing faster. This particular shape of frog, as it takes up more space than the other 2, ended up making my life a little harder when formatting the frog cards. Finally, I added variation to the suit of bones. All these symbols are skulls. The original is a cat skull, I believe, and I added a fox skull and a rat skull. The skulls are not in scale since I wanted them to be around the same size, but even keeping the skulls out of scale, this suit has the most size variation between symbols. With the majority of the cards now designed, every suit from 2 to 10, I got started on the ace cards next. The aces aren't full-scale illustrations the way the face cards will be, but they are more detailed and complex, and larger, than the regular number cards. I sketched these on actual paper while in class rather than on Photoshop, so when I'm doing my line art, I'm tracing photographs I took of my sketchbook page. First came the ace of mushrooms, a cluster of brown mushrooms around a large toadstool on a bed of moss. Next came the ace of frogs, a little frog prince sitting on a lily pad, with a golden crown on his head. He might be my favorite ace, it's between him and the ace of bones, which I drew last. This is also the first time I added extra colors to my color palette. I will keep adding colors throughout the drawing of my face cards whenever I realize I need more variations, and every color gets tinted with either dark brown or beige for unity's sake. I now have 6 shades of gold to use, to add nice shiny metal shading to the art. The ace of crows is the most detailed ace I drew. It's a crow perched on a little pile of gold treasure and trinkets with a pendant necklace in his beak. This is another drawing where I needed the gold I just added to my color palette. The jewels are all red or green, rubies or emeralds, and there's a string of pearls. The crow himself is black, of course, and looks very regal and proud of his collection. Finally, I started the ace of bones, the other contender for my favorite ace. This is a deer skull with antlers draped in vines and patches of moss. I love the look of deer skulls, but because of the antlers, I couldn't use them in the number cards, so this was my opportunity to draw one. The vines match the design of the simple vines that ring each card, which I'm partly using to make sure all my cards will print well, and partly to make them pretty and aesthetic. Now we get to the fun part. Not that I wasn't having fun this whole time, this whole project was something so new and different to me, and it kept me excited to work on it for the entire 2 or 3 months it was in progress, which is rare for a project. Anyway, we get to the even funner part, the face cards. The face cards were also the most challenging part of this project, mostly just the coming up with ideas part. Going in, I only knew all 3 face cards for the suit of bones, so I started there. I also did not draw these cards in order, I drew them in whatever order I thought of ideas in. I've just arranged all the processes in the video by suit and value. First, we have the Jack of Bones. I'm not being particularly traditional with my face cards. Generally, I make it so the queen is clearly female and the king is clearly male, but the jacks can be pretty much anything. They don't even have to be one singular person. In this case, the Jack of Bones is 2 skeletons dancing in a moonlit meadow of flowers, with flower crowns around their skulls. I had to look up so many reference images of human skeletons, and even then, a lot of my bones don't look quite right. It was still really fun to work on though. I don't draw a whole lot of complete skeletons, and not only are these complete skeletons, but they are also posed to be dancing together, a pose I have enough difficulty with when drawing fully fleshed people. I'm honestly impressed that this drawing worked out as well as it did. Occasionally I did cheat by sticking a hand or a foot out beyond the vine border so I didn't have to draw it. I'm not doing any shading to my face cards other than the occasional cast shadow under a figure. I will differentiate bones that are behind other bones by coloring them in a darker beige, but that's it, all the colors remain flat. flat. I'm drawing 12 of these. Adding shading would have extended the time it took by a lot, and I think the flat style works better for this anyway. Next, we come to the Queen of Bones, who is not a skeleton herself, but a necromancer sorceress using magic to raise the dead to be part of her army. This was a really fun face card to draw. There are several skeletons bursting up through the earth, and the Queen has a hand outstretched, surrounded by glowing magic. I had to take a photo of my own hand to figure out how on earth to pose it. The cards aren't historically accurate, they don't even have a set time period. The idea is that they look like parts of fairy tales or fantasy stories. The clothing is vaguely medieval, but not designed to be part of one particular time period. It just generally looks like the kind of clothing people in a magical forest would wear. In this case, the Queen has a gown with dramatic sleeves and a belted waist, and a hooded cloak for dramatic effect. She also has a skull mask with antlers to really feed the dark magic vibe. Her cloak is clasped with a brooch shaped like a femur, and her belt buckle looks like a fanged skull. The Queen's magic is green, and the skeleton's eyes glow the same shade, indicating that they are under her control. Other than the pale color of the bones, the rest of this image is very dark, the Queen dressed in black and dark greens, and the graveyard set at nighttime. I also had to add to my color palette a bit more for this image, adding a range of skin tones and some more shades of dark green. The line art for the King of Bones did not get recorded, and at this point I drew him so many months ago that I do not remember what might have gone wrong. For all I know, I just forgot. The King of Bones was the first face card I drew. He is a skeleton sitting on a throne of twisted branches, with a cloak of moss around his shoulders, a scepter in his hand, and a crown of bone on his head. His cloak is clasped with skull-shaped brooches, and the scepter looked like a skeletal arm and hand clasped around an orb, which I recolored many times before deciding it should be red. Despite appearing to be made of bone, the scepter and crown are both golden, although the crown is overgrown with moss. The throne was carved out of a tree, dark wood with patches of moss and some still-living leaves sprouting from the branches. The next suit I work on is the suit of mushrooms, starting with the Jack. The Jack is an androgynous fairy with a mushroom hat sitting on a toadstool. They have a mischievous look about them, short and choppy hair, and a simple loose shirt dress and visible corset. One knee is up and their hands wrapped around it, and the other knee is resting sideways on the mushroom. I was probably in much the same position when I drew this fairy, although sitting on a boring office chair, not a toadstool, sadly. The fairy has pointed toed slippers that lace around their ankles, and I'm not sure what time period or vibe I was going with their clothing. The mushroom they are perched on is bright red, so for contrast, they are dressed in green and pale brown. Their skin is brown too, as is their hair, and their eyes, although it's hard to see at this scale, are green. The Queen of Mushrooms is frightening, a spectre of fungus and spores. She's nearly floating, dressed in a ragged dress, and her hair long and cascading wildly around her. Most notably, dozens of mushrooms sprout from her body. Several crown her head, one fruits from her right eye, and many more emerge from her arms and legs and neck. This is probably the most disturbing face card I designed, but it's also one of the ones I had the most fun with. I'm not sure what that says about me. I haven't played or watched The Last of Us, but I can't say that the images I've seen of the show haven't inspired this art at all. This queen is very colorless. The mushrooms taking over her body are white and brown, her dress is grey, her skin dead white, and her hair colorless as well. The only color in the image is the background. Where I originally thought the queen would be floating through space, I changed it so that she is emerging from a fairy ring of mushrooms at her feet. The final touch to this drawing is a subtle cloud of spores that the queen is summoning around her. Then I moved on to the King of Mushrooms, who has a completely different vibe. The King of Mushrooms is burly, with a huge bushy beard, a crown of mushrooms around his head, and a mushroom staff in his hand. He has a cloak pinned at one shoulder, covering half his body, and under the cloak he wears a simple tunic, belt, hose, and boots. His hair and beard look like a mane of moss, and a few more small fungi sprout there. His cloak is a rich red with a gold pin, while the rest of his clothing is simple and forest-colored. The King of Mushrooms stands in a forest, with fungus-covered trees behind him and more mushrooms at his feet. Where the Queen of Mushrooms appears terrifying, inhuman, and dangerous, the King of Mushrooms is friendly and approachable, a guardian of the forest. The next suit I tackled was the suit of crows, and once again for some reason I don't have a recording of the line art of the Jack of Crows, so we dive right into the coloring. The Jack of Crows is a girl riding on a giant crow, her arms outstretched like the crow's wings, and her cloak flying out behind her. This illustration is one of the simpler illustrations I made. There isn't a lot of detail to it, but it's still a cool image, I think. The girl has a green cloak and dark red dress, and her braids, which fly out behind her, are blonde. The Queen of Crows is a lot more detailed and a lot less human. She's a harpy, decked out in trinkets and perched on the edge of a nest of tangled branches. From her chest down, she's covered with feathers, and her feet are clawed crow talons. Her arms are feathered as well, closer to wings than human arms. Around her neck are chains and pendants, and she has a tiara on her head and a belt of charms around her waist. Her hair is a wild nest of curls, which was really fun to draw. The jewelry is all green and gold, and her feathers are dark, like a crow's, so shiny treasures stand out. Her wings are darker than her body feathers, just to make them stand out against each other, and she has dark skin and golden eyes. Her nest is a tangle of dark brown branches, and the background, to contrast all the dark colors I used, is light brown. In order to keep all these illustrations to look consistent with each other, every image is drawn with the exact same line weight, 6 points for most outlines, 5 points for some small detail work. They also share a color palette, obviously, and none have any shading except on the metal. Even then, the shading is all sharp lines, there's no gradients present anywhere. When two images have the same motif in them, like skeletons or toadstools, I'll often switch between finished illustrations that had that motif and ones in progress to make sure all the colors match exactly. The King of Crows is a warrior, also decked out in jewels and trinkets. Once again, I don't have footage of the line art, so we dive right into the coloring stage. The Crow King has a cloak of black feathers and a bird-headed mask, and is wearing chainmail under a tunic with gauntleted hands resting on the hilt of a rapier. I had to get help drawing the rapier from the Raven Cat gremlin, who I've been sending every card I drew for feedback. Thanks for putting up with that. The cloak has an emerald clasp, and the Crow King has a giant green stone on a gold pendant around his neck, and a belt studded with more precious metal. His rapier is silver, and he's dressed in deep green and grey under the cloak. The background isn't particularly defined, I just added some generic bushes so that it wasn't just a solid colour. The suit of frogs was the last suit I finished. For some reason I just had a lot of trouble coming up with any ideas for these face cards. I decided fairly early on that I wanted the Jack of Frogs to be a frog in human clothes, but the only image I had in mind was Frog and Toadstar, which looks more Victorian than fantasy medieval, and it just didn't fit with the rest of the cards. Finally, though, I decided to make a frog with a medieval hood and tunic, and that worked. The Jack of Frogs is perched on a lily pad in a very classic frog pose, with a 13th century hood down, not over his head, and tunic on, which happen to be clothing that you can, in fact, do this pose in. I speak from experience. In the empty space above the Jack of Frogs, I added a few fireflies for fun, and the frog's eyes are reflecting the firefly glow. The frog is light green with a pale underbelly. His hood is brown and his tunic is dark green. I didn't really intend for every suit's face cards to have a primary colour association, but it happened anyway. Every bone has pale beige, every crow has black, every frog has green. The only exception is mushroom cards. The Jack and King both have red, but the Queen does not. I finished the Jack of Frogs with some firefly glow, then moved on to the Queen of Frogs. The Queen of Frogs is a very small person, probably a fairy, although no wings are visible, sitting on a lily pad with her legs dangling in the water and her arm around a large frog, who looks very content with this situation. The Queen has curly hair and a circlet around her forehead, and is dressed in a simple lace-up kirtle, the skirt gathered around her thighs so that her legs can paddle in the pond. The frog is dark green, and the Queen's kirtle is a very light green for some contrast over a white chemise. Her hair is black and her skin brown. In the background, there are a few more lily pads, one of which has a water lily in bloom. Finally, we come to the King of Frogs, which is just a large frog sitting on a mushroom with a very fancy crown on his head. He is probably the father of the frog prince from the Ace of Frogs, and he looks very stern and lordly. The crown is golden and red, with rubies studded all around the outside. He isn't the only king or queen to have a crown, but is probably the most regal. The frog himself is a simple light green colour, and his mushroom is brown, so the crown is the brightest pop of colour in the image. The face cards are done. That means we're done, right? Not at all. Next, I designed the Joker. The Joker is basically an ent from the Lord of the Rings. He looks like a walking tree with many fingers on his arms that sprout leaves and wide root-like legs covered in bark. He has a thick mossy beard and many glowing eyes. I actually ended up making 2 Ent Jokers. The second one is an exact copy of the first but with different colours. Ent Joker number 1 is very dark in colour. His beard is dark green, his woody skin dark brown, and the bark on his legs basically grey. His leaves are a mid-tone green, and the only light part of his design are his eyes, glowing gold. I didn't end up recording the process of changing the colours for Ent Joker number 2, but here is what he looks like. His woody skin and bark are both much lighter, the moss for his beard brighter, and his leaves are red and autumnal. He's also facing the other direction. The final step of this process was making the backs of the cards, and I actually made 2 varieties, both identical except for colour. The reason for this is that most of the card games I like playing require 2 decks, and if the colours of the deck backs are different, I can easily shuffle 2 decks together and sort them back out again at the end of the game. It's the same reason classic card decks come with both red and blue backs, although for me, it's the full colour and sepia backs. I wanted every suit to be represented on the back of the card, so the design I came up with is a crow perched on the antler of a deer skull, and a frog right next to the skull, both placed in a ring of mushrooms. I then copied the design and rotated it, so that the card appears the same upside down or right way up. The colours of the design match the colours used on the other side of the cards. The frog is light green, the crow is black, the skull is beige with brown antlers, and the mushrooms are a mix of white, brown, and red spotted toadstools. The challenge of this wide variety of colours present was figuring out a background colour that everything else stood out against. I came up with 3 ideas for the background. Solid dark green and brown in a gradient, and a green ellipse in a background of dark brown. Showing all 3 options to the Ravencat gremlin, she suggested that the third was best, and I went with it. I didn't record the process of colour changing the card back, but here are the 2 varieties. There are also far too many cards I drew to show every single one at the end of the video, but here are a few of my favourites. I love all the aces, I love the Queen of Bones and the Queen of Mushrooms, and I love the King of Crows. And here are the cards in physical form. It is so unbelievably exciting to have my digital art in a physical, professional-looking form. And you can get these cards too. They are for sale through the website I printed my own deck with, and I've linked it in the description. Money is tight at the moment. I'm a student living off savings and government payments right now, so buying a deck of cards would really help support me. Liking this video and subscribing also help, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. It took me months to make. Anyway, until next time, bye!